Today I'm going to be replacing the rear brakes and rotors on my LX470, but this also applies to any 100 series Land Cruiser. So now you're looking at the passenger side rear wheel, and with the wheel removed, there's just two 8mm bolts holding on this dust cover over the caliper. And once you get the dust cover off, you'll have access to the caliper bolts. So there are two 14mm bolts holding on the caliper to the caliper bracket, and you just need to break the top one loose. Don't loosen it any more than that, because as you're about to see, I had to go back and hand tighten it because you need the top bolt in place in order to get the bottom one loose. For the bottom bolt, you'll want to have a slim 17mm wrench handy because you might need to counter hold the caliper slide pin on the other side of the bracket. I didn't need it here, but I did need it on a reassembly, so I'll show you that later. And with the two 14mm bolts removed, now you can actually take off the caliper. And just be mindful of the brake line that's attached to the caliper, so you don't want to do anything that would strain the brake line. You're about to see that there's still plenty of brake pad material left on my pads, but I'm replacing them now because my rotors are warped and I'm installing new rotors. After the caliper is removed, the next step is to remove the two 17mm bolts holding on the caliper bracket. And these are on there pretty tight, so it takes a decent amount of effort. Just make sure you hang on to the washers that are on those bolts. Now you can remove the caliper bracket. Alright, so we're almost ready to pull off the rotor, but I couldn't pull it off by hand, and when that happens, it means there's either rust holding it in place, or it means your parking brake shoes are pushing out just a little too much. So there's a little star wheel that you need to manipulate with the flathead screwdriver, and in order to get the shoes to pull in, you need to move the star wheel down. So that was enough to loosen it up. And here's what the star wheel looks like. You can see it's all the way bottomed out right here. And if I start pushing up on it, it's really easy, and that pushes the shoes out. So yeah, you want the gear to be going counterclockwise, if you're looking at it from the right side, in order to pull the shoes in and release the rotor. This is my new rotor, and they get shipped with an oil coating, so you have to spray brake clean on there, on all the surfaces, to remove that coating. And now's a good time to clean up your dust cover. You could use a brush before doing this, but I just sprayed some brake clean on there, and yeah, it was really dirty. And then you can put on the new rotor. Now, this is the time when you want to mess with the parking brake again by adjusting that star wheel. So just move the star wheel up to push the shoes out enough to where the parking brake lever doesn't have to be pointing up like 90 degrees for it to engage. But you also need to have it loose enough so that the parking brake doesn't drag when you're turning the rotor by hand. So now I'm just putting on these 3 lug nuts to hold the rotor in place for when I install the caliper and caliper bracket. Okay, so here's the brake pad, and on the outside, the left side, there's this anti-squeal shim that Toyota makes, and the kit comes with 4 shims. There are 2 that look like this, and then there are 2 that have kind of a horseshoe rubber face. So I was expecting one of these pads to have the horseshoe shim on it, but neither of them did, which means whoever installed these before did them incorrectly. And I know that these were done by a Toyota certified mechanic, so that just goes to show that if you want it done right, you need to do it yourself. But yeah, see, this one looks exactly like the other one. And in fact, when I did the driver's side, both pads had the horseshoe shims. So to be clear, the inside pad should have the grid style shim and the outside pad should have the horseshoe shim. Now I'm just taking a moment to get familiar with how this little pad support plates are on there, taking note of their orientation and making sure to get it on video so I can reference it later. But really the easiest thing to do is place the old pads on the ground and then one by one remove the support plates and place them next to the pad in the exact orientation you found them. That'll make it a lot easier for reinstall. Then it's time to clean up the caliper bracket. And you want to get the whole thing clean, but really focus on those grooves where the pad support plates were sitting, and also make sure to clean the surface where the bolts go. And once you're done brushing, get some brake clean in there and then wipe off the brake clean and we should be good to go. So this is the top of the caliper bracket. And look at that. The grease was really gross in there. And the bottom one will have a different slide pin that should have a rubber sleeve at the end, but mine was missing. I don't know what happened. I guess the rubber just disintegrated over the years, which makes me think that these have never been replaced. So I'm just looking for the rubber here, but there's nothing in there. Just nasty gunk. So yeah, this is what the new bottom slide pin should look like. So you should at least replace the bottom slide pin, if nothing else. I'm going to go ahead and replace all 4 boots because they're only like $1 a piece. But first I need to clean out the holes that the slide pins go in. And this would be a lot easier with a bore brush, but I just used a rolled up shop rag. So the boot has 2 different sides, and you want the small inner circle to be facing out. You put these on by pinching and pulling the boot around in a circle, and just be patient with it. It takes a little bit of effort. So here's the new top slide pin with no rubber sleeve. And this is the Toyota rubber grease that the FSM calls for, and it's a rubber safe grease. So just get that slide pin all coated and then work it in and try to get as much of that grease in the boot as possible. Then do the same thing for the bottom slide pin. And this one is a little more difficult to get in because of that rubber sleeve, but just work on getting that grease in there and then you can use 2 hands to press it in if you need to. And you're just pressing it in until the boot gets all the way to the base of the bolt head. There's a little collar on there for the boot to hold on to, and that'll create a nice seal in the boot. And that's looking good. Just going to wipe off the excess grease, and then we're ready to move on to the next step. Putting on the anti-squeal shims on the new pads. The FSM says you're supposed to grease both sides of the shim, which I didn't do here, so make sure you get a layer of grease in between the shim and the pad. But here's what the other style shim looks like. See that horseshoe shape? I'm going to be putting the horseshoe style shim on the outermost pad. And this matches the shape of the caliper, so that's how you can kind of figure it out. So then I'm just cleaning up the pad support plates. I won't show you all of them, but just brush off as much of that brake dust as you can, and then spray them with brake clean. For this part, let me know in the comments if you don't do this, but I'm greasing the grooves before installing the support plates. My thinking was just to prevent any potential rust from building up there. But yeah, then you can put those support plates back in. And like I said, it makes it a lot easier for reinstall to have them laid out exactly like they go on. And you just want to make sure that the plates aren't pinching the boots at all. And finally, put some more brake grease on the plates. So yeah, once again, this is the horseshoe shape. I'm putting it on the outside of the caliper. For this pad, you need to install it starting from the inside, like I'm doing here, and then just kind of fiddle with it until you can get it in the grooves. Be sure to cover the other side of the groove with your thumb so it doesn't pop right through. But yeah, this part can be annoying. And then I'm putting the grid style shim on the pad on the inside of the caliper. And when you're doing this, you want to be careful not to get any grease on the face of the pads because that will ruin them. Then put some grease on the backs of the shims and you're ready to install. Next, grab one of the 17mm bolts with the washer intact and clean up the threads a little bit. And then the FSM doesn't call for this, but I'm just putting on a little bit of blue Loctite. And I found that it helps to lift the caliper a little bit to get the threads to line up. Then same thing for the bottom bolt, just clean up the threads and put on a little bit of blue Loctite. Now I'm just tightening those down some before I get out the torque wrench. And the torque spec is 76 foot-pounds on both of those 17mm bolts. Then the FSM says to remove some of the brake fluid out of the reservoir. So I just have a turkey baster and I'm removing 3 to 4 basters full of brake fluid and putting that in a cup so I can pour it back in once I'm done. And you do this because whenever you are pushing the piston out like I'm doing here, that's going to push fluid back into the reservoir and you don't want it to overflow. And I highly recommend getting this piston expander tool. It's way easier than using like a C-clamp and an old pad. Just get the tool. It'll make your life a lot easier. And then you can put the caliper back on. For the caliper bolts, both of them are 14mm. And again, I'm just putting a little bit of blue Loctite on them. And this is where you're going to need the slim 17mm wrench. As you can see, the slide pin is rotating right there. So you got to hold the slide pin with the wrench and then you can tighten it. And the torque spec for both of these 14mm bolts is 20 foot-pounds. Then you can put the dust cover back on with those 8mm bolts. I just got those hand tight. And then I'm cleaning up a little bit of excess grease right here. And just one final wipe down with some brake clean. And like I said earlier, I did things a bit out of order, so you should be doing this before you install the caliper. But I'm just tightening down the parking brake now. And then I'm ready to reinstall the wheel. The torque spec on the wheel lug nuts is 97 foot-pounds. But yeah, that's everything. Just do the same on the other side and you're officially done with the rear brakes and rotors. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe and like this video if this helped you out.